Welcome back to the Prepare Like a Pro podcast. This week on the show we have Selwyn Griffith, the head strength and conditioning coach at the Melbourne Football Club. Selwyn is a strength and conditioning coach and osteopath with expertise with elite athletes to enhance their physical and psychological qualities, highly experienced in accelerated reconditioning strategies and return to play performance. Before working at Melbourne Football Club, Selwyn was a performance and head of rehabilitation coach during his 8 years at the Brisbane Lions. Super excited for this chat. Thanks for joining us. Guys, remember to send through your questions. We'll have a Q&A at the end of this chat. Before we invite Selwyn on for the episode 38, our mission here at Prepare Like a Pro is to empower athletes and aspiring staff with practical knowledge with some of the industry's most inspiring individuals and to strengthen the AFL community. If you like the show, please show your support by following us on Instagram and subscribing to us. We're on YouTube, iTunes and Spotify. Thanks for joining us, guys. Bear with me. I'm just going to invite Selwyn over now. G'day, mate.
Hey, mate. How are you?
Very good. Thanks for jumping on. Great backdrop.
No, thanks for having me. Yep, in the capital, Canberra. So they've turned on the weather for us today, which is nice.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, we'll dive straight in. We've got a few fans jumping on, so we'll get straight into it, mate. Take us back to the very beginning. At what age and when did you discover you had a passion for the fitness industry, strength and conditioning, and you're an osteo as well, so the medical side of things?
Yeah, so I've always enjoyed playing sport. Grew up playing basketball and Australian rules football in Melbourne, and like majority of S&C coaches, whether it be injury or just interest in continuing to explore the performance aspect, basically found myself towards the back end of high school looking at what my opportunities were or options were. And I actually had quite a lot of back pain playing basketball throughout the end of my high school years, and had seen chiropractors, physios, and then actually went and saw an osteopath, Nick Brasher, who is actually still working in Australian rules football at the moment as an osteopath with Collingwood Football Club. So Nick was an osteopath near where I grew up and treated me, and actually one of my best mates' older brothers, Dan Comerford, was also an osteopath, and so there was a little bit of a personal connection there with, I guess, osteopathic medicine. And so at the end of my high school, I started an osteo degree at RMIT Bundoora, and that kind of started my journey in, I guess, the medical and performance aspect. I was still playing AFL on the side, and then towards the back end of my osteo degree, I actually sustained a broken wrist, ruptured scapholunate ligament, fractured triquetrum ulna, basically wrist reconstruction, which then resulted in golden staph and about 10 days in hospital, and never played footy again. So that was 14 years ago or so now, and so pretty much knew my journey in professional sport or any form of sport was done from that. But then also it forced me to kind of broaden my horizons in regards to, I knew that I probably wouldn't be able to do manual therapy for 30 years based on the wrist injury as well. So with basically having a wrist fusion post the golden staph, there was once I finished my degree, I basically looked to broaden my horizons in performance, and that's where I just started pretty much every month. Whatever I was earning as an osteopath, I reinvested into my professional development. So every month or second month, I was doing a professional development course, whether that be in FMS or SFMA or Exos, athletes performance, as it was about 12 years ago when I was starting that journey. And that really just started my interest more in the performance realm as I was, I guess, developing my skill set as an osteopath, which wouldn't change at all, because I think the medical foundation that I learned throughout a 5-year osteopathic degree has really assisted me in my development through, I guess, into the performance realm, a little bit more away from medical.
Yeah, fantastic. Oh, thanks, mate. Thanks for sharing. There's there's plenty there to unfold. Maybe we'll go back to the decision to be an osteo. So you had some injuries that you were working on, and you mentioned you saw some other practitioners at the time, and it was who was the osteo? Nick, was it, from Collingwood, who's now working at Collingwood Football Club, that sort of got you on the right track. So what was he doing differently to some of the other osteos that sort of resonated with you and helped you to get back to footy?
Yeah, I think 15 years ago there was maybe a little bit of more of a difference between an osteopath and a physiotherapist and a chiropractor. I think now, I think there's been a greater, I guess, collaboration in regards to what each of those allied professionals probably offer now within the osteopathic realm and physio and chiro. But 15, 16 years ago, it was seen that, I guess, osteopaths were primarily manual health practitioners, and so their abilities to manipulate and to perform manual therapy was seen to be, I guess, at the elite end, because from day one as an osteopath you're trained in manual healthcare. So we're probably fortunate, slightly separate to physiotherapists who, throughout their junior school of physiotherapy, they're taught to deal with cardio, rehab. They're taught to work in hospitals with geriatrics, pediatrics. But from an osteopathic perspective, from day one, it's a little bit about assessment, clinical decision making, and then manual therapy. And even in my degree, when we studied, there wasn't a huge amount of exercise rehabilitation education within the course. So that I think was the big difference in me choosing to pursue the osteopathic course rather than physiotherapy. Also, the enter score at that stage was a little bit easier to get into. Physio was highly competitive, so if you didn't have a good Year 12 score, you were pushing it uphill to get in. But osteo. Yeah, but osteo, interestingly, when I went through, you had to interview. So there was about 300 applicants to RMIT, and then you sat an interview with one of the teachers and actually one of the fifth-year students. And they basically asked you questions around what you knew about osteopathy, because there are principles, I guess, that are the foundation for osteopathic medicine. And so the other thing that you found is the dropout rate was substantially low in osteopathic medicine, because you had people who were invested in wanting to pursue that as a career rather than possibly, I'll just do this because it seems interesting. And a 5-year course it's a substantial investment, both mentally and financially. So you found that a lot of people were really invested, which is probably what I saw as beneficial and why I chose that stream ahead of physiotherapy or chiropractic.
Yeah, and so you mentioned your love for performance and sport right back in high school. So it sounded like that was something that you were interested in when you started the osteo degree, and you mentioned the investment that it does take and that interview process. Were you discussing, or did you have thoughts back then that this is something I'm going to do and work in elite sport, or was it more just to hone your craft and better understand the medical side when you enrolled?
No, elite sport was always the goal. I wasn't sure what the pathway would be, but it was always the goal. And interesting, my sister a couple of years ago sent me, she was trawling through old photo albums at the family home.
She logged in? Is her name Therese?
No, that's my wife.
Okay. Yeah. So it's just spying in.
She might have my daughter watching, but I think COVID probably forced my sister to look back through a few photo albums. She actually found an interview with me in Year 12 saying that I wanted to work in professional sport, and that was before I'd made the decision to be an osteopath. And so I think it was ingrained in my mindset from an early age. And then I've probably just been fortunate enough to have some great mentors and guiding figures in my life that have allowed me to then continue to pursue that dream.
And back then, I'm not sure if Nick was still at Collingwood, but I know from my short stint in AFL, like, it's not as common for an osteo to be in. Physio seems to be the common trend. were you aware of that when you enrolled, and it didn't matter? Like, did you think potentially of, is this a risk that I'm taking, that it might be harder to get into AFL, or was it more just elite sport that was your focus, so it didn't matter if it was AFL?
Yeah, I think I was well aware that it wasn't a common, I guess, pathway in professional sport and in medical departments to have an osteopath. Bruce Duncan, who you would have worked with and seen at Hawthorn, has probably been one that's been ingrained within Australian rules football environments probably the longest, and Nick has been at Collingwood for a substantial amount of time, and then Dan Comerford, who I mentioned, actually worked at Collingwood as well, and then Port Adelaide, and was part of the connection to me at Brisbane Lions 10, 11 years ago as well. So there's been a handful, and now you are seeing osteopaths actually employed on the tennis circuit, on the professional golfing circuit. So the pathway is now probably a little bit clearer for osteopaths as they're qualifying than what it was for me 12, 13 years ago. But there was still the platform there. And then I think what the main thing that you need to do then is just make sure that your skill set is broad enough and that you're good enough at being an osteopath to then build the networks and the relationships to hopefully foster that pathway into professional sport. But it's definitely harder for osteopaths than say someone with a physiotherapy background, because they have been ingrained in professional sport for so long. So it's not an easy path. There are nowhere near as many positions, and also with everything that's happened with COVID, roles within professional sport are unfortunately probably a slight disconnect there. But I know plenty of individual athletes and plenty of osteopaths who are working in other sports such as triathlon, golf, tennis, who are dealing with either individual sport or there are other osteopaths that are possibly working at the semi-professional and amateur level as well as sport trainers and the likes.
Yeah, fantastic. I think you make a great point. There'd be a few aspiring strength and conditioning coach, osteos, physios that are potentially watching this podcast. So it's one thing to get your foot in the door, but it's another to sort of make the most of that opportunity. Externally, it sounds like you definitely have at your time at Brisbane and now at Melbourne. I know going into the ASCA conference, speaking to colleagues a couple of years ago at Brisbane, that you were at the top of the list for most people in terms of listening into the reconditioning side of things. How did you go about your work as a rehabilitation with the players, and how much of the osteo side of things did you bring into your reconditioning philosophy?
Yeah, so my time at Brisbane, quite a lot. I was part of the medical team as an osteopath, treating the players and also providing, I guess, exercise ideas from an injury prevention or mitigation perspective, and worked really closely with Matt Haas and Alex Clark around that time. And we had a fantastic medical crew in Shane Lemke, and worked with Toby Watson, who had been on the Tour de France, and also Scott Fraser and Pete Lyon. These guys that have all been within professional sport for a significant amount of time. And so they really helped, I guess, develop my skill set from an osteopathic perspective and how that fit within the greater scheme of our high performance department. And then I transitioned more into the performance aspect and working underneath Matt Haas and Alex Clark as an assistant S&C on long-term athletic development programs. And then from there, when we had a changeover in staff, is when I stepped into that rehabilitation space. And I actually initially continued to treat some of the players, but then took a step back from treating and just focused on the rehab and performance aspect of our program, which initially was a really tricky adjustment for me, because when you've been ingrained in an environment where the athletes are used to having your manual therapy skills, and now you're explaining to them, no, well, that's not my role, as athletes can be.
Give us a rub, yeah.
Can't
Give
you
us a rub, mate.
my back? Or, and so there was a change in mindset there that was required from myself, but also from the playing group, and and Peter Blanche, who took over as the head of medical, was fantastic in that. And the message basically was that what I can do as a performance and rehab coach is going to be much more valuable to the athlete than what I can do with my hands with them on the table. And that became a change in the culture at the Brisbane Lions Football Club as well, is the more you can do off the table, the more you're going to be able to do on the field. And while manual therapy, I think, can be really valuable in certain environments, there's also an aspect that we know that increased training intensity, I guess increased training loads, is going to better prepare you for performance within the context of Australian rules football. And so for me, transitioning into that rehab or reconditioning space, the medical education became a really good framework for then applying it within a performance aspect. And that was really key at how we developed the reconditioning philosophy. It was a focus on performance. We didn't have a rehab program. We had a reconditioning program, and we were focusing on developing the athlete and not just returning an athlete from injury. And that was a change in mindset, both from my perspective, but also from the playing group's perspective, and our messaging and our language towards the players was really strong in that. And the team, that's been at that I was lucky enough to be a part of for the last 4 or 5 years, was fantastic at having an aligned messaging of that, which just made my job easier. Didn't matter what the injury was or who the athlete was. We had an aligned message and a really great program there.
Fantastic. Aaron, you've just asked if we could ask questions for Selwyn. You guys definitely can. So if you tuned in, send through your question by hitting the question button at the bottom of your screen. James Wolfenden, you've just sent yours in. We'll definitely find time for that at the end of this chat. So send them through, guys. You mentioned that the performance focus, and then you personally shifting from being in the table in the medical room to now being in the gym, being on the field. How did you personally find that challenge from sort of having being the players and the whole club seeing you as the medical practitioner? Now you're focusing on performance and reconditioning these guys. Has that something that you had past experience with and were just eager to get into there? And when that opportunity arose, you just jumped at it? Or was it something that you developed because of the role? Did you develop those roles as those skill sets, I guess?
I think there was an element of, I'd invested a lot of time and energy into becoming an osteopath and trying to be the best osteopath I could. And so when I came out into private practice, all I wanted to do was treat as many people as I could to improve my skill set, make sure that I was a great clinical decision maker, could assess and could treat. And so I guess I took that into the elite sport and high performance area and knew that I'd done a lot of work in that. So I had a lot of confidence in my skill set there. And then when you start to step into that rehab and performance space, you kind of have the man or the woman on your shoulder, just kind of where you second guess yourself around. And I have that consistent, comfortable level of anxiousness in everything I do still at the moment, in regards to, am I pushing hard enough? Have I chosen the right program to implement to accelerate this athlete as quickly as I can back to performance and back to field training? And then how do I make sure that we mitigate the risk of re-injury or subsequent injury? And so there was that level of anxiousness around that transition. I knew my skill set was really good as an osteopath manually and what I could do there. And then it was a case of, all right, am I good enough as a strength and conditioning coach and a performance coach to take that skill set and not need my hands anymore to focus on the exercise prescription, the manipulation of training load? And I'd be lying if it was easy. Countless hours in front of a computer, questioning whether or not I'd had the right program, questioning whether or not I'd prepared the athlete, and especially for some of those key athletes, when they return for their first game after a long layoff, you have that anxiety around, you just want them to perform. And so there's definitely that, and I still have a degree of that from time to time. I think it's, as I said before, it's a comfortable anxiousness around. I have confidence in knowing that I've got case studies of successful reconditionings and successful return from injury. So I have a framework there, but every athlete's different, every injury is different, and every environment is different. So it's about continually reviewing, refining, and improving on what we're trying to develop now at the Melbourne Demons. And I'm fortunate enough to have some pretty amazing practitioners around me to make sure that we keep each other accountable, and that I lean on them for their expertise as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. You mentioned some strong influences on your career. I know you've talked about a few already, but are there any other guys that stand out at top of mind that have helped you along the way, and how so, if there is?
Yeah, well, when I first started at the Brisbane Lions, I actually lived on the Gold Coast, and I'd drive up and back a couple of days a week. And while I was on the Gold Coast, was fortunate enough to spend a lot of time with Joseph Coyne and Gavin Pratt, who have both recently been over at UFC Shanghai and are phenomenal practitioners. And Coyne had a exercise rehab facility there on the Gold Coast where he had some of the elite Ironman and triathletes, and then also had some Wallabies and NRL players that would come through there in their off season. And he was kind of seen as a leader in that private facility space. And so I was really fortunate to work alongside him and under him for a while on the Gold Coast there, and see how he went about it. And there was a fantastic facility, and Gavin Pratt as well, a fantastic practitioner. So those guys were awesome early on, and then the group that we had at the Brisbane Lions were just fantastic in my early development, and still spend a lot and still communicate with them. And then from an other mentor perspective, it was about acknowledging where I guess my gaps were in my knowledge, and trying to learn from guys in the field or girls in the field who had been in similar environments, or I knew were doing successful things within high performance sports. So Ross Smith and the guys at the AIS went in there and spent a little bit of time just watching how he went about working with long-term rehab athletes. And then Ben Serple, when he was at the Brumbies, fortunate enough to have some great practitioners at the Broncos and QAS as well in Brisbane, and Chris Caviglio and Jeremy Hickmans, and then the group that we've more recently had through the Brisbane Lions in Damien Austin, Dirk Spitz, Peter Blanche. So these guys, Blanche was just been a fantastic mentor for me. And then just been really fortunate in that space to have some great people around me. And then with athletes performance early on in my career, Lachlan Wilmot, Phil Merriman and I all did the same athletes performance mentorship at Richmond Football Club, and it was led by David Joyce, and that would have been 10 years ago. And so also to lean on those two guys as part of my career has developed. Matt Toohey was even on that, who's been at the Newcastle Knights. So I've just been really fortunate to be able to be surrounded by some great minds and people that I feel comfortable, I guess, challenging me in how I apply some of my principles and philosophies to develop the best program possible. And it's just been a great asset for me in my development.
Yeah, fantastic. That's amazing amount of people that have helped you along the way. When you're reading a research article, and you find an area of that research interesting, and you're looking at implementing it, what would be sort of your filter process? Would you go to like a mentor, like the guys that you've mentioned? How would you filter in what's applicable in the practical sense in elite sport to what you read? Mainly for the strength and conditioning coaches and medical practitioners that are listening.
So probably my first one is identifying in the environment that I'm working on what has possibly been a growth area for us. And so if that's a particular injury, if it's a particular injury type, if it's a particular injury mechanism, and that would be, I guess, my starting point to start to look at research articles. And then if possible, it's great to actually speak to the researcher, and the guys at ACU have been fantastic in Dave Opar, Ryan Timmins, and Jack Hickey, and even Matty Bourne, in regards to exploring different aspects of rehabilitation and strength and conditioning. And so initially, that's probably my filter is what's the growth in the environment that I'm in, whether that be from an injury perspective, or it may also be from a performance perspective. So let's use training load as an example, and acute spikes based on shorter preseason, condensed training periods, and so initially it may, because the issue with a lot of research articles is the actual research may have been done 12 to 24 months prior to the article coming out. So it's actually, when you chat to the researchers who performed it, by that stage, they may have developed other hypotheses or actually have greater insights into that initial research study. So chatting to guys like Paul Tafari and Rich Johnston around training load and condensed periods, and leaning on other sports that have been exposed to that sort of environment before. It's not about how you can take that from one environment and just dump it into yours, but it's about how can you learn from that to possibly refine how we are doing what we're doing at the Melbourne Demons or the Brisbane Lions or whatever environment you're involved in, rather than trying to change your entire framework. Because the one thing that I saw at Brisbane in my 9 to 10 years there was 3 different head coaches, a couple of different GMs, 2 different high performance managers. And anytime there is some change within your organisation, you tend to have a change to your injury profile and to your organisation and your culture as well. So it's not uncommon to see a spike in certain types of injury associated with a change in gameplay or a change in game style or even a change in conditioning philosophy. And so it's just trying to evaluate how resilient your athletes are to withstand that change versus trying to change everything at one time, because at the end of the day, skill is king and the game is king, and we need to respect that. So if we're trying to change everything else within the performance aspect and losing sight of what is actually key, which may be, it's great if you've got the best strength and power program or the best conditioning program, but if your athletes can't hit a target or kick a goal, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Winning solves all problems.
Yeah. That's a great point. The stability of an environment is so important, and working together as a team to see how you can integrate optimal practice, and whether a small little 1% change is going to really make a big difference in the grand scheme of things. That's great advice, mate. Thanks for that. You mentioned also a little bit earlier how over time you've topped up areas of whatever you want to call it, weaknesses, or areas that you haven't had experience. How important is it to get where you've got to in elite sport on also topping up your strengths? Like, that seems to be a trend more when coaches or athletes are talking about from an athletic point of view. But obviously as a practitioner, along the way, you do need to be quite a generalist, it seems, for those that have been around long enough. They've like yourself, been in the medical room, they've been in the gym floor, on the field. At what point in your career do you start also topping up what your top 3 traits as a practitioner?
Yeah, so I think the key initially is I was hired at the Brisbane Lions to be an osteopath. So the first priority is be as good as an osteopath as I can be and make sure I'm elite in that area. And then what are the aspects that I think are going to make me more employable or better at my role moving forward? And so for me, it was using the people around me in the Lions environment early on, and some of my mentors to kind of better identify, I guess, my growth areas. And so from a performance and strength and power prescription perspective, there was a little bit of that. But then it was also from an assessment perspective, leaning on the physios around me to make sure that my assessment techniques were good enough to be in a game day role, even though I was never going to be a game day physio, because that just wasn't my role. So that was the initial area. And then as I've transitioned on, for me, especially in the rehab space, it's understanding which areas I think I know really well. And then more recently, I've probably chosen to possibly do some talks or presentations on that area, so that I critically analyse what I do, why I do it, and how I do it. And then you have to present that to your peers. And it's a great way of, I guess, having a bit of filter on exactly what you do, but then also those discussions at seminars, workshops, conferences like I had with yourself a couple of years ago at ASCA. You start to further analyse what you believe you do well, but then possibly what other aspects you can continue to work on. And so I definitely, in the last 3 to 4 years, have used seminars, workshops and conferences as a platform for that to help build my confidence in my knowledge, and hopefully, I guess, build my continued knowledge base. And then it's also the unique nature of working in rehab. You sometimes deal with injuries you haven't dealt with before. So then it's starting to reach out to people who maybe have more experience than you in that area, to reach out to possibly experts in certain other sports that maybe deal with that injury as a commonality within that. And then more recently, it's probably about, I guess the questions I've asked myself is, how can I make the people around me even better? And how can I facilitate them in their role? So now coming into the Demons, it's more so about how can I continue to make Burjo's job easier? How can I continue to make Watsy's job easier? How can I continue to help our head of sports science, Dave Regan? And so it's a little bit of taking a step back and seeing how I can facilitate the function of our department. And so I've probably spent a little bit more time in that, I guess, leadership space or the motivational questioning in regards to what is it that we do well and what can we continue to refine.
Fantastic. And you mentioned working on like your reconditioning phase and focusing on performance rather than rehab, and how that was quite impactful at the Brisbane Lions. For those, whether it be developing footballers that may have just had an injury and are currently in rehabilitation, what are some things you've seen over time that are trends when rehab doesn't go well, that you try and make sure that athletes understand early days when they're in rehabilitation or reconditioning phase?
I think where possible, it's getting the athlete to start early. And that may, if we're talking about soft tissue injuries, that can tend to be quite early. It can be day one post-injury, but, it's understanding that movement is medicine, and the athlete will get lots of confidence out of being able to move and move early. And so where possible, trying to have that as one of your key philosophies, I think, is important. And that even goes for possibly bone injuries and tendon injuries as well. There is always something you can do. So focus on what the athlete can do, and whether that's from a cross-training perspective, a strength perspective. It's really important for their psychological motivation as well. And I think that's the area that I would say I've developed the most in the last 5 years, is managing the psychosocial environment around the athlete and around injury. And I think that's as powerful as having the best S&C program around them. I think if you can have them motivationally invested and have them engaged in every aspect of the program, both in their reconditioning, but then also the bigger picture of the program, of the actual football performance program, how they're ingrained in team training, in team meetings, and those aspects is super powerful. So those would be some of the key components, and just looking at how you use cross-training, how you use strength prescription to maintain a high chronic training load from an RPE-based perspective. so that you are maintaining good work capacity development, and see it as an opportunity. If a guy has been, or a girl has been told that they're just not strong enough, or they're just not fit enough, use that as motivation for the athlete. Use that as a framework for the program that you're developing, and that's how you'll get investment from them. But it's also how they'll be able to demonstrate to the coaches what they've worked on while they've been away from the main group. And I guess don't get too caught in just what their weaknesses are, because majority of people are recruited into elite sport for their strength and their weapon. So make sure you continue to refine their weapon as well as filling the gaps around them.
And a similar question when it comes to prevention. So for young developing footballers out there that maybe don't have a strength and conditioning coach, what would be your top 3 things that you think are really important for footballers to make sure they're doing, developing footballers? Doesn't have to be top 3, but just
consistency is key. Consistency is key. So, maintaining consistent running exposure, consistent high speed and sprint running exposure, but also making sure you have consistent skill exposure. I think sometimes we can get caught up in, I need to get fitter, so I'm just going to run. But making sure that you're exposed to the skill development aspect is key from an injury prevention perspective. I think the research is pretty clear that there are a couple of valuable exercises if you don't have strength and conditioning advice, that performing a Nordic once a week, performing some adductor strength Copenhagen's or other variations once a week can have a benefit on maintaining tissue resilience. And then something as simple as the FIFA 11 Plus as a general warm-up perspective. Those are 3 that you could implement without much exercise prescription knowledge, and know that as long as you maintain training consistency within the context of your sport and those 3 aspects, obviously some form of strength exposure would be beneficial, but you probably need some educated advice around the sport that you play in that context. But those would be my key recommendations.
Love it. Well, that's it from me. I'll hand over to the guys that have been watching. We'll start with Coach James Wolf. Were there any gaps in your own knowledge that you found since you took the osteopath compared to the physiopath? Well, I'll have to continue that. To the physiopath, and if so, how did you go about bridging those gaps?
Yeah, so I think, as I mentioned before, in my osteopathic degree, there was minimal exercise prescription and exercise education. So that was a definite gap in my knowledge early on, and so towards the back end of my degree and then the initial stages of working in private practice, I just spent a heap of time on educating myself in that space. And so that was doing professional development courses like FMS, like athletes performance mentorships, and the ASCA education components as well. And so that was probably the biggest gap in that space. The other component was possibly taping and strapping just for unique injuries. I think the general ankle and shoulder, but then you have more complex injuries and taping techniques that some experienced physiotherapists have adapted over time. And so that was more so being ingrained in an environment. And while I was working at Brisbane, I was also contracting to Queensland Sports Medicine Centre that had 23 physiotherapists that had worked with the Wallabies at Olympics. And so we had a 1 hour PD every week, and the topic changed. And so that became a really great learning experience for me from those physiotherapists.
Awesome. Good question, James. And this one's from Aaron. It's also a long one. So others, so strength and conditioning aspects, what else do you think osteopaths can provide for footy players? He's just graduated as an osteopath, and has always been a dream of his to find himself in a football environment. He's AFL obsessed and was introduced to osteopathy 5 years ago by yourself. and like to one day go down a similar path and help elite athletes perform at their best. There you go. That's a good one.
So I think, as I mentioned before, making sure you're elite at your osteopathic assessment, clinical decision making, your treatment skills, your ability to change pain, whether that via a manual technique or whether it be via education, and then your initial acute injury prescription. Those are going to need to be your one wood. Then developing your S&C knowledge around reconditioning from a running perspective and understanding the different aspects of MAS, aerobic capacity, high intensity training, I think is important if you're wanting to progress into elite sport, but making sure that your initial assessment, knowing the key components of your osteopathic medicine is key initially.
Fantastic. Thanks, Selwyn. Thanks so much for your time, mate. We'll wrap it up. What are you most excited about for the rest of the year 2021? What's on the horizon for you?
We've just had our second daughter, so actually now that we've moved to Melbourne and start to feel like it's home, it's just about enjoying what Melbourne has to offer, I guess. We're about to come into our third round of the AFL, so I'm just excited for what we're building at the Demons. We've got a fantastic performance and medical team, so it's just exciting to be a part of that. From a personal perspective, now that COVID's kind of subsided somewhat, workshops and hosting some workshops in this year in Melbourne and Sydney predominantly around accelerated reconditioning strategies and continuing to, I guess, share my knowledge across the wider community. I think I've been really fortunate to learn from others. So now my role within what I can provide back to the osteopathic and the strength and conditioning community is part of my knowledge, and hopefully some people can learn from that. But initially it'll be family, get that work-life balance, and then it'll be how we can continue to help up-and-coming S&Cs and allied health professionals.
Fantastic. And where's the best place to go to book in for those workshops and find out when those seminars come up?
So that'll be on the Athletic Approach Instagram. Once they start to, at the moment, there's nothing advertised on there, but yeah, they'll slowly start to drip feed through there. So if you keep an eye on that, you'll see information there.
Fantastic. Awesome, Selwyn. Thank you so much again, mate. I really appreciate your time, as well as you sharing all your experiences and stories as well. It's been amazing to have someone on with your expertise. So thank you so much, mate.
Thanks for having me, mate. Thanks for everything you're doing for the S&C community and the coaching community. It's a great asset to everyone. So enjoy the rest of your Easter.
I appreciate it. You too, mate. Enjoy your Easter and go D's.
Cheers.
Catch you, mate. Thank you for listening, guys. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure to follow us on Instagram. You can watch back our full chat on the IGTV, and we post a new podcast every Monday. So feel free to subscribe. We're on YouTube, iTunes, and Spotify. And every Monday we upload a new podcast. So hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you for your questions as well. And for the developing footballers out there that want to work with Prepare Like a Pro, click the link in our Instagram bio where we've got online training programs as well as information about all our AFL experienced strength and conditioning coaches. You can work one-on-one with us, both in the gym and on the field, as well as online. So head over to our link in our Instagram. Thanks, guys. All the best. Have a great Easter.